Hello, Mustangs. This is Miss Brooks. Today is Friday, April 3rd, 2020, and that means next week is spring break. So make sure you're taking some time away from your computers, away from your schoolwork, you're staying healthy, you're having fun. This is the time to relax. We're not sure how the rest of this year is going to go as far as all the things that are happening. So when I find out something, you will definitely hear from me. Um, Spring break, you won't hear from me. I'm gonna be like you guys, and I'm going to take some time and relax, stay healthy, anything. So keep that in mind throughout spring break. Um, I won't be available as much because really we all need some time away from the schoolwork, away from um, the computers, everything. We just need some time. Um, but let's go ahead and get into today's reading. Um, it is a Let's see, we are on page 169. Now, this is already much longer than Esperanza Rising, as you guys can tell. Um, and remember, every two chapters, another perspective is taking place. So right now, yesterday you guys read all in Carter's perspective. Today you are going to read in Sadie's perspective. And make sure you're keeping note of where you are and you're doing all of the comprehension questions. Those are required. Those have to be done. Okay? Um, Chapter 15, page 169, it is called A Godly Birthday Party. So, you guys should have read, let's see, you should have read chapter 14, A French Guy Almost Kills Us. Um, so, and then right at the end of 168, you guys heard, and if we fail this test, Zia regards her coldly. This is not a sort of test you fail, Sadie Kane. You pass or you die. So let's hope nothing bad happens. So let's go ahead and get to reading. They took Carter to a different dormitory, so I don't know how he slept, but I couldn't get a wink, so she didn't get any sleep at all. It would have been hard enough with Zia's comments about passing our tests or dying, but the girls' dormitory just wasn't as posh as Amos's mansion, so it's not as fancy. The stone walls sweated moisture. Creepy pictures of Egyptian monsters danced across the ceiling in the torchlight. I got a floating cot to sleep in, so like kind of like a floating bed almost. And the other girls in training, initiates, Zia had called them, were much younger than me. So when the old dorm matron told them to go to sleep straight away, they actually obeyed. The matron waved her hand and the torches went out. She shut the door behind her and I could hear the sound of locks clicking. So a matron is kind of like the leader of the dormitory, like the main leader who's just like, okay, we gotta go to bed at this certain time, we gotta eat at this certain time. They take control of that area. Lovely. Imprisoned in a nursery school dungeon. I stared into the dark wall until I heard other girls snoring. A single thought kept bothering me, an urge that I just couldn't shake. Finally, I crept out of bed and tugged on my boots. I felt my way to the door. I tugged at the handle. Locked, as I suspected. I was tempted to kick it in until I remembered what Zia had done at the Cairo airport broom closet. So, I pressed my hand against the door and whispered, "Sahad." Locks clicked. The door swung open. Handy trick. Outside, the corridors were dark and empty. Apparently, there wasn't much nightlife in the first gnome. I sneaked through the city back the way we'd come and saw nothing but an occasional cobra slithering across the floor. After the last couple of days, that didn't even faze me. I thought about trying to find Carter, but I wasn't sure where they'd taken him. And honestly, I wouldn't do this on my own. After our last argument in New York, I wasn't sure how I felt about my brother. The idea that he could be jealous of my life while he got to travel the world with dad, please. And he had the nerve to call my life normal. All right. I had a few mates at school like Liz and Emma, but my life was hardly easy. If Carter made a social faux pas or met people he didn't like, he could just move on. I had to stay put. I couldn't answer simple questions like where are your parents or what does your family do or where are you from without exposing just how odd my situation was. I was always the different girl, the mixed race girl, the American who wasn't American, the girl whose mother had died, the girl who with an absent father, the girl who made trouble in class, the girl who couldn't concentrate on her lessons. After a while, one learns that blending in simply doesn't work. If people are going to single me out, I might as well give them something to stare at. Red stripes in my hair? Why not? Combat boots with a school uniform? Absolutely. Headmaster says, I'll have to call your parents, young lady. I say, good luck. Carter didn't know anything about my life. So we were just hearing from Carter's point of view about um how hard his life was compared to Sadie, and now we're hearing Sadie's side of the story. And what are you guys thinking of that? That different perspective. Are you trying to see it from both sides, or are you trying to pick a side and stick with it? Honestly, I think both sides make very compelling arguments. And really, it's hard for them to understand what the other person's situation is like. So that's something that they're going to have to grow as characters and figure out. Um, let's see. Where are we? Oh, yeah. But enough of that. The point was, I decided to do this particular bit of exploring alone, and after a few wrong turns, I found my way back to the Hall of Ages. What was I up to, you may ask? I certainly didn't want to meet Monsieur Evil again, or creepy old Lord Salamander, but I did want to see those images. Memories, Zia had called them. I pushed open the bronze door. Inside the hall seemed deserted. No balls of fire floating around the ceiling, no glowing hieroglyphs, but images still shimmered between the columns, washing the hall of strange, multicolored light. I took a few nervous steps. I wanted I wanted another look at the age of the gods. On our first trip through the hall, something about those images had shaken me. I knew Carter thought I'd gone into the dangerous trance, and Zia had warned that the scenes would melt my brain. But I had a feeling she was trying to scare me off. I felt a connection to those images, like there was an answer within, a vital piece of information I needed. I stepped off the carpet and approached the curtain of golden light. I saw sand dunes shifting in the wind, storm clouds brewing, crocodiles sliding down the Nile. I saw a vast hall of revelers. I touched the image, and I was in the palace of the gods. Huge beings swirled around me, changing shape from human to animal to pure energy. On a throne, in the center of the room, sat a muscular African man in rich black robes. He had a handsome face and warm brown eyes. His hands looked strong enough to crush rocks. The other gods celebrated around him. Music played, a sound so powerful that the air burned. At the man's side stood a beautiful woman in white, her belly swollen as if she were a few months pregnant. Her form flickered. At times she seemed to have multicolored wings. Then she turned in my direction, and I gasped. She had my mother's face. This is really interesting because we know of an Egyptian goddess that had multicolored wings. So that could be a representation of some kind. She didn't seem to notice me. In fact, none of the gods did, until a voice behind me said, "Are you a ghost?" I turned and saw a good-looking boy of about 16, dressed in black robes. His complexion was pale, but he had lovely brown eyes like the man on the throne. His black hair was long and tousled, rather wild, but it worked for me. He tilted his head, and it finally occurred to me that he was asking me a question. I tried to think of something to say. "Excuse me? Hello? Marry me?" Anything would have done. Anything would have done. But all I could manage was to shake my head. "Not a ghost, huh?" He mused. "A ba, then?" He gestured towards the throne. "Watch, but do not interfere." Somehow, I wasn't interested in watching the throne so much, but the boy in the black dissolved into a shadow and disappeared, leaving me no further distraction. "Isis," said the man on the throne. The pregnant woman turned towards him and beamed. "My lord Osiris, happy birthday." "Thank you, my love. And soon we shall mark the birth of our son, Horus, the Great One. His new incarnation shall be his greatest yet. He shall bring peace and prosperity to the world." Aha, there we go. So Isis and Osiris and Horus, their representations. So again, this is extremely accurate. Isis took her husband's hand. Music kept playing around them, gods celebrating. The very air swirled in a dance of creation. Suddenly, the palace doors blew open. A hot wind made the torches sputter. A man strode into the hall. He was tall and strong, almost a twin of Osiris, but with dark red skin, blood-colored robes, and a pointed beard. He looked human, except when he smiled. Then his teeth turned into fangs. His face flickered, sometimes human, sometimes strongly wolf-like. I had to stifle and scream. I had to stifle and scream, but I'd seen that wolfish face before. The dancing stopped. The music died. Osiris rose from his throne. "Set," he said in a dangerous tone. "Why have you come?" Set laughed, and the tension in the room broke. Despite his cruel eyes, he had a wonderful laugh, but like the screeching he'd done in the British Museum. Or nothing like the screeching he'd done in the British Museum. It was carefree and friendly, and as if he couldn't possibly mean any harm. "I come to celebrate my brother's birthday, of course," he exclaimed, "and I bring entertainment." He gestured behind him. 4 huge men with the heads of wolves marched into the room, carrying a jewel-encrusted golden coffin. My heart began to race. It was the same box Set had used to imprison my dad at the British Museum. "No," I wanted to scream. "Don't trust him." But the assembled gods oohed and awed, admiring the box, which was painted with gold and red hieroglyphs trimmed with jade and opals. The wolfmen set down the box, and I saw it had no lid. The interior was lined with black linen. "This sleeping casket," Set announced, "was made by my finest craftsmen, using the most expensive materials. Its value is beyond measure. The God who lies within, even for a night, will see his powers increase tenfold. His wisdom will never falter. His strength will never fail. It is a gift." He smiled slyly at Osiris. "For the one and only God who fits within perfectly." I wouldn't have queued up first, but the gods surged forward. They pushed each other out of the way to get at the golden coffin. Some climbed in, but were too short. Others were much too big. Even when they tried to change their shapes, the gods had no luck. as if the magic of the box were thwarting them, like taking them away, like, hey, you don't fit in here, go. No one fit exactly. Gods grumbled and complained as others, anxious to try, pushed them to the floor. Set turned to Osiris with a good-natured laugh. Well, brother, we have no winner yet. Will you try? Only the best of the gods can succeed. Osiris' eyes gleamed. Apparently, he wasn't the god of brains because he seemed completely taken in the box's beauty. All the other gods looked at him expectantly, and I could see what he was thinking. If he fit inside the box, what a brilliant birthday present. Even Set, his wicked brother, would have to admit that he was the rightful king of the gods. Only Isis seemed troubled. She laid her hand on her husband's shoulder. My lord, do not. Set does not bring presents. I am offended, Set sounded genuinely hurt. Can I not celebrate my brother's birthday? Are we so estranged that I cannot even apologize to the king? Osiris smiled at Isis. My dear, it is only a game. Fear nothing. He rose from his throne. The gods applauded as he approached the box. All hail Osiris, Set cried. The king of the gods lowered himself into the box, and when he glanced in my direction just for a moment, he had my father's face. No, I thought again, don't do it. But Osiris laid down. The coffin fit him exactly. A cheer went up from the gods, but before Osiris could rise, Set clapped his hands. A golden lid materialized above the box and slammed down on top of it. Osiris shouted in rage, but his cries were muffled. Golden latches fastened around the lid. The other gods surged forward to intervene. Even the boy in the black I'd seen earlier reappeared, but Set was faster. He stamped his foot so hard the stone floor trembled. The gods toppled over each other like dominoes. The wolfmen drew their spears, and the gods scrambled away in terror. Set said a magic word, and a boiling cauldron appeared out of thin air. It poured its contents over the coffin, molten lead coating the box, sealing it shut, probably heating the interior to 1,000 degrees. Villain! Isis wailed. She advanced on Set and began to speak a spell, but Set held up his hand. Isis rose from the floor, clawing at her mouth, her lips pressed as if an invisible force were suffocating her. Not today, lovely Isis, Set purred. Today I am king, and your child shall never be born. Suddenly, another goddess, a slender woman in a blue dress, charged out of the crowd. Husband, no. So we know that Set is actually married too. Um, she tackled Set, who momentarily lost his concentration. Isis fell to the floor, gasping. The other goddess yelled, Flee! Isis turned and ran. Set rose, and I thought he would hit the goddess in blue, but he only snarled, Foolish wife, whose side are you on? He stamped his foot again, and the golden coffin sank into the floor. Set raced after Isis. At the edge of the palace, Isis turned into a small bird of prey and soared into the air. Set sprouted demon wings and launched himself in pursuit. Then suddenly, I was the bird. I was Isis, flying desperately over the Nile. I could sense Set behind me, closing. You must escape, the voice of Isis said in my mind. Avenge Osiris, crown Horus king. Just when I thought my heart would burst, I felt a hand on my shoulder. The images evaporated. The old master Iskandar stood next to me, his face pinched with concern. Glowing hieroglyphs danced round him. "Forgive the interruption," he said in perfect English, "but you were almost dead." That's when my knees turned to water and I lost consciousness. So she basically passed out. Um, when I awoke, I was curled at Iskandar's feet on the steps below the empty throne. We were alone in the hall, which was mostly dark except for the light from the hieroglyphs that seemed to glow around him. "Welcome back," he said. "You're lucky you survived." I wasn't so sure. My head felt like it had been boiled in oil. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't mean to look at the images." "And yet you did. Your Ba left your body and entered the past. Hadn't you been worried?" "Yes," I admitted, "but I was drawn to the pictures." Iskandar stared into space, as if remembering something from long ago. "They are hard to resist." "You speak perfect English," I noticed. Iskandar smiled. "How do you know I'm speaking English?" "Perhaps you are speaking Greek." Oh wow, we're speaking Greek. I hoped I hoped he was kidding, but I couldn't tell. He seemed so frail and warm, and yet it was like sitting next to a nuclear reactor. I had a feeling he was full of more danger than I wanted to know. "You're not really that old, are you?" I asked. "I mean, old enough to remember Ptolemaic times?" "I am exactly that old, my dear. I was born in the reign of Cleopatra the Seventh." "Oh, please." "I assure you, it's true. It was my sorrow to behold the last days of Egypt before that foolhardily queen lost our kingdom to the Romans. I was the last magician to be trained before the house went underground. Many of our most powerful secrets were lost, including the spells my master used to extend my life." So, take this into perspective with the story in the past with Set, Osiris, Isis. That whole story with Osiris being trapped in a coffin, that is exactly what the stories have that's basically what the mythology, that's exactly what it was. But still take note that this is a fantasy story. It's not real. Magicians, we know magicians didn't exist, but we know also with the myth, the accuracy of the myth is really true to its character. um and yes, back in the Ptolemaic times, that the last days of Cleopatra the Seventh. Yes, there were more than one Cleopatra. The Romans took over Egypt, and that was the end of ancient Egypt, is what we think of it now. Magicians these days live long, sometimes centuries, but I have been alive for 2 millennia. "So you're immortal?" His chuckle turned into a rattling cough. He doubled over and cupped his hands over his mouth. I wanted to help, but I wasn't sure how. The glowing hieroglyphs flickered and dimmed around him. Finally, the coughing subsided. He took a shaky breath. "Hardly immortal, my dear. In fact," his voice trailed off. "But never mind that. What did you see in your vision?" I probably should have kept quiet. I didn't want to be turned into a bug for breaking any rules, and the vision had terrified me, especially the moment when I changed into the bird of prey. But Iskandar's kindly expression made it hard to hold back. I ended up telling him everything. Well, almost everything. I left out the bit with the good looking boy, and yes, I know it was silly, but I was embarrassed. I reckoned that part could have been my own crazed imagination at work, as ancient Egyptian gods could not have been that gorgeous. Iskandar sat for a moment, taping his staff against the staff. Oh, tapping his staff against the steps. You saw a very old event, Sadie. Set taking the throne of Egypt by force. He hid Osiris's coffin, you know, and Isis searched the entire world to find it. So she got him back eventually? Not exactly. Osiris was resurrected, but only in the underworld. He became the king of the dead. When their son Horus grew up, Horus challenged Set for the throne of Egypt and won after many hard battles. That is why Horus was called the Avenger. As I said, an old story, but one that the gods have repeated many times in our history. So, yes, again, that is extremely accurate. Horus and Set in mythology did fight many times. They had epic battles, and Horus eventually became the top ruler of Egypt, also known as the royal protector. Repeated? The gods follow patterns. In some ways, they're quite predictable, acting out the same squabbles, the same jealousies down through the ages. Only the settings change and the hosts. There was there was that word again, hosts. I thought about the poor woman in New York in the New York Museum who turned into the goddess Serket. In my vision, I said, Isis and Osiris were married. Horus was about to be born as their son. But in another story, Carter told me all three of them were siblings, children of the sky goddess. Yes, Iskandar agreed. This can be confusing for those who do not know the nature of the gods. They cannot walk the earth in their pure form. At least not for more than a few moments. They must have hosts. Humans, you mean? Okay, so what he's saying here is basically, in a way, it's very similar to ancient Greek mythology. You know how, let's see, Zeus and Hera, Demeter, Poseidon, Hades, all of them were sons of Kronos. And then later on, Zeus and Hera married, all that kind of stuff. It's very similar. It's basically saying a very similar thing. But really, in this moment, they're talking more about the how do I word this without confusing you? They're talking more so about, yes, they can only show up in visions and stuff as their true forms for just a few moments, but really they need a host or a human like suit, I guess. You could say like they disguise themselves as humans and stuff to stay a little longer. And really that's what happened in Percy Jackson. They had a few different forms. I think Poseidon, if I remembered, he always had like swimmer shorts on and stuff like that. Yeah. So think of it kind of like that. Or powerful objects such as statues, amulets, monuments, certain models of cars, but they prefer human form. You see, gods have great power, but only humans have creativity, the power to change history rather than simply repeat it. Humans can, how do you modern say it? Think outside the cup, the box, I suggested. Yes, the combination of human creativity and godly power can be quite formidable. At any rate, when Osiris and Isis first walked the earth, their hosts were brother and sister. But mortal hosts were not permanent. They die, they wear out. So their mortal forms in this case were brother and sister. Really, it's weird, but again, this is mythology and it's very wrong today. It shows you from back what was acceptable thousands of years ago is very different than what's acceptable now. Later in history, Osiris and Isis took new forms, humans who were husband and wife. Horus, who in one lifetime was their brother, was was born into a new life as their son. That's confusing, I said, and a little gross. Iskandar shrugged. The gods do not think of relationships the way humans do. Their hosts were merely like changes of clothes. This is why the ancient stories seem so mixed up. Sometimes the gods are depicted as married, or siblings, or parent and child, depending on their hosts. The pharaoh himself was called a living god, you know. Egyptologists believe this is just a lot of propaganda, but in fact, it was often literally true. The greatest of the pharaohs became hosts for the gods, usually Horus. He gave them power and wisdom and let them build Egypt into a mighty empire. But that's good, isn't it? Why is it against the law to host a god? Iskandar's face darkened. Gods have different agendas than humans do, Sadie. They can overpower their hosts, literally burn them out. That is why so many hosts die young. Tutankhamun, poor boy, died at 19. Cleopatra the Seventh was even worse. She died to host spirit she died to host the spirit of Isis without knowing what she was doing, and it shattered her mind. In the old days, the House of Life taught the use of divine magic. Initiates could study the path of Horus, or Isis, or Sekhmet, or any number of gods, learning to channel their powers. We had many more initiates back then. So, again, this is really confusing. So, the gods are just like, I'm just a god. There's no label as far as, okay, I'm a mother, I'm a sibling, they didn't have labels. The only labels that they had were the hosts that they took on. Um, so really, of course, we know that that's not true, but that's what the Egyptians believed. Keep that in mind. That is what the Egyptians believed. And with this is saying that it's implying that Tutankhamun and Cleopatra the Seventh, they died from a spirit. Really, we know that that doesn't exist, and we know that magic doesn't exist. But again, this is fantasy. It's supposed to entertain you. Um, Iskandar looked around the empty table as if imagining it filled with magicians. Some adepts could call upon the gods only from time to time. Others attempted to host their spirits with varying degrees of success. The ultimate goal was to become the eye of the god, a perfect union of two souls, mortal and immortal. Very few achieved this, even among the pharaohs, who were born to the task. Many destroyed themselves trying. He turned up his palm, which had the most deeply etched lifeline I'd ever seen. So if you ever see like the lines in your hands, some of those are called lifelines. When Egypt finally fell to the Romans, it became clear to us, to me, that mankind, our rulers, even the strongest magicians, no longer had the strength of will to master a god's power. The only ones who could. His voice faltered. What? Nothing, my dear. I talk too much. An old man's weakness. It's the blood of the pharaohs, isn't it? He fixed he fixed me in his gaze. His eyes no longer looked milky, but they burned with intensity. You are a remarkable young girl. You remind me of your mother. My mouth fell open. You knew her? Of course, she trained here, as did your father. Your mother, well, aside from being a brilliant scientist, she had a gift of divination, one of the most difficult forms of magic, and she was the first in centuries to possess it. Divination? Seeing the future. Tricky business, never perfect, but she saw things that made her seek advice from unconventional places, things that made even this old man question some long held beliefs. He drifted off into memory land again, which was infuriating enough when my grandparents did it. But when but when it's an all-powerful magician who has valuable information, it's enough to drive one mad. Iskandar? He looked at me with mild surprise, as if he'd forgotten I was there. I'm sorry, Sadie. I should come to the I should come to the point. You have a hard path ahead of you, but I'm convinced now it's a path you must take for all your sakes. Your brother will need your guidance. I was tempted to laugh. Carter, need my guidance? For what? What path do you mean? All in good time. Things must take their course. Typical adult answer. I tried to bite back my frustration. And what if I need guidance? Zia, he said without hesitation. She is my best pupil, and she is wise. When the time comes, she will know how to help you. Right, I said, a bit disappointed. Zia, for now you should rest, my dear. It seems I too can rest at last. He sounded sad but relieved. I didn't know what he was talking about, but he didn't give me the chance to ask. I'm sorry our time together was so brief, he said. Sleep well, Katie. Wait, sleep well, Sadie Kane. But Iskandar touched my forehead, and I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. So I want you guys to know if you like Iskandar right now. Because I will tell you, some people don't. They think he's a little shady, but I quite like him. He just reminds me of the classic, like, old man that's trying to give some really good advice. But who knows? And there's so many questions that still need to be answered. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to put the description of the next chapter below. And remember, as soon as you're done with work, we're good. And you're good for spring break. All right. Have a good spring break, guys. Bye.